My name is Gianni Russo, aka Carlo, the infamous son-in-law from The Godfather. I'm now known as the Hollywood Godfather, and this is my story.
Before all of the wins in my portfolio, I was a little boy diagnosed with polio. Experimenting with cures, I tried every one. Felt everything in my right, but my left was numb. Walking with a limp, like will I ever run? Once again, or is this it? Am I forever done? Living in the hospital was never fun. Some people were cool, but not everyone. You never know who you're lying in a room with. So I broke a broomstick in half and let it groove with the concrete in the bathroom floor. It had a new tip, stashed it behind the toilet in case I ever had to use it. Cause one day Dolores had a chat with me. Said she got word someone was coming after me. My heart started beating rapidly. I looked in front of me and back of me. Who thinks they're whacking me?
Softly, love, and hold me warm against your heart. I hear your words, the tender trembling moment starts. We're in a world.
Welcome everybody for another episode of Hollywood Godfather. And I can't believe it. We're entering our 4th year. Thanks to all of you, your mail, your support, telling your friends, and the sirens are coming to get me. It's New York City. The music of the night. But I got enough law enforcement in front of me, and we're out there, so I have no problems. So with that said, Pat, I want you to do the honors of our distinguished guest. I can't wait to talk to him about the old neighborhood.
Yes, we are happy to have with us today Miles Watson, who's had a varied career in law enforcement. He spent 10 years in Hollywood as a screenwriter and a rewrite person. He's back in law enforcement now in Pennsylvania. I met Miles when I was an instructor in the graduate school at Seton Hill University. He was one of my students in a writing popular fiction course. And I was there a long time, and I've taught a lot of people. And Miles, by far, is the best writer, student or not, that I've ever come across. In fact, when I grow up, I want to be as good a writer as Miles Watson.
Okay, now you got me curious. I got to read something that he's written.
Well, let me tell you something. If anything ever happens to me, that's the go-to guy. Trust me. Anyway.
Make sure I get your information, Miles.
now I'm wiring a car bomb as we speak to get rid of Pat.
Yeah. Miles, welcome to the show. That's the official greeting.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
We should let our audience know his last name, right?
Miles Watson.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear that.
Yeah, didn't hear that part. Okay, let's start off, Miles, by telling the listeners your background, starting with your family, and we'll get into our theme for the show.
Okay, so basically, how I'm linked into this, I guess, is both sides of my family were Chicago people, Chicagoland area, mainly the city, but basically everybody was concentrated in that area. And my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, he was a CBS big guy in radio for a while before the stock market crashed, but they lived in Capone's neighborhood, in a Capone-controlled neighborhood. My grandma, when I was growing up, she told me about the speakeasies that they used to hit and the restaurants that were all full of gangsters. And they actually lived in the same apartment building when they lived on Lakeshore Drive before the stock market tanked. Their next door neighbor in the apartment building was James Wilkerson, the judge who convicted Capone. So growing up, I'd hear these Chicago stories from my grandma. My grandfather had died before I was born, but my dad grew up, they were very, on my paternal side, my dad, his family, they were very poor. And my dad and his brother, they went to Steinmetz High School, and I was talking to Gianni about this a minute ago. I don't know what Steinmetz is like today. I think it's a prep school. But in the 50s, it was definitely not a prep school, at least not in the sense we understand. It was.
Oh, no, I know, believe me. I know the neighborhood. I spent a lot of time there. So your father was a writer?
No, he ended up becoming a journalist. He was a journalist for the Chicago Sun-Times for about 33 years before he died.
So he knew my friend Irv Kupcinet.
I would absolutely probably bet on it.
Yeah.
He was he was Chicago all the way through. He fought with Mayor Daley. He was attacked by his thugs, those whole 9 yards. He was a city editor when he was still in his 20s. He was a very 100% Chicago guy, street guy. He ended up going to Steinmetz High School. And of course, at Steinmetz is where he was in the same class. In fact, I have the class picture. I don't have it with me because it's in my mom's house, but Tony Spilotro obviously didn't graduate from Steinmetz. He was there 2 years, but there's a picture of them together, which I get a huge kick out of in their kind of plaid shirts with the 50s haircuts. They're 16 years old. And so that's where he met Tough Tony, as they called him.
Yeah, he was tough even as a kid. He was nuts.
Yeah. My dad said that Tony Spilotro was small, brooding kind of kid, but he always had a gang. He always had a gang with him all the time. And they were called the Apprentice Thugs by the teachers there, because it was very well known where Tony's trajectory was, even when he was a kid, what he was going to end up doing.
Right.
And he was always in fights. He would steal other kids' projects, in like metal shop, and then try to substitute the project for his own, and he would inevitably get caught. He would get in fights. He would beat kids up, get beaten up. If he got beaten up, he would always come back with his squad of apprentice thugs, and they would stomp the kid. My dad told me a funny story about how a friend of his was shooting pool one night, and Tony came over to him and demanded a game at $1 a game, which, 1956 or whenever this was a lot of money for these poor neighborhood kids, So the guy refused. Tony said if he didn't play him, they were going to beat him up. So he played him, he beat Tony, and then they jumped on him and beat him anyway. So
he never changed. I met him later on in life, and I knew a lot about him because I used to spend a lot of time in Melrose Park. I don't know if you know where that is, because Accardo lived out there, and I was only dealing with that high end of the outfit at that time, because my partner was Nick Nitti, Frank Nitti's son.
Right. And
they put us together. I actually met him at the Palmer House. And from that time on, we stayed together until he died, Nick. Now his son John's with me in Chicago. I got a lot of stuff in Chicago yet. I got a big distribution there with Greco and Sons, all legitimate stuff. But
sure.
Yeah. So they say.
That's what he's been telling me for 5 years.
No,
I believe you. Don't get me wrong. I believe you.
But I'm sure you never knew of the Leiden Motel.
No.
The Leiden Motel, Melrose, they built a club called the Court Lounge because the Leiden Motel was built like a castle. It surrounded the whole block, and you drove in on the first floor through and got into the courtyard. And they built the club there. And I can never understand, why does the motel have iron gates that close every time you go in and get out? But we had the homecoming for Jackie Cerrone Sr. That's how long I'm going back. And I met them.
Those are the old legends of the 60s, the 50s.
Yeah.
Cerrone,
that's
all
I was out there with them. It was crazy times.
The Camel.
And that's when I forgot who was grooming Spilotro, but he adored this kid, and he did some work for for this guy. And they got this guy. I don't know if you heard the story. Did you hear the story when he put the kid's head in the vice?
Oh yeah. I think he got that idea from Metal Shop because my dad told me a story about how he Tony borrowed my dad's compass. Those metal.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah.
With a double pronged end or whatever. It's a compass, I think it's called.
Yeah, to make circles and all that stuff.
Yeah, you make the circles with it. I don't know. We used to use them for every purpose but math when I was in school. But at any rate, Tony had the same idea. So he borrows the compass in the shop class. He doesn't give it back. So my dad asked for it back, and he said he threw it at my head, and I just ducked, and it went into the wall. And went out of the wall like an arrow in a bad movie. So Tony actually tried to avert my birth by killing my father with a compass. I'm sure a lot of people would approve of that, actually, but I resent it.
Oh, I don't think so. What little I know of you, you're a nicer guy than Tony Spilotro.
Most
He
people are.
said he actually had a protection racket when he was 14, 15. He would,
Oh,
he would
yeah.
collect the lunch monies of.
I'll give you a better one. At the first week of school for the freshmen, he used to sell them counterfeit lunch passes for $5 all year. You could eat. An elevator pass, you don't have to go on a staircase. I mean, he had every racket going. I know more about him. When I finally met him, which I didn't really want to meet him, I met him by accident at the Stardust Lounge in Las Vegas, at the Stardust Hotel, because they ran the Stardust Chicago. And I met him with Nick on New Year's Eve. The worst day of my life for 2 years. 2 years, it was a pain in my neck. The ant.
Well, he's consistent. He was consistent. Let's say that.
Oh, yeah. But like you said, he always had a gang. Always had a gang. He destroyed
And
Vegas.
my dad, was not the. My dad was a tall guy, and in later life he was very strong physically, but he was definitely not the type to want to mix it up with the apprentice thugs. So, but he said he played a little psychological games. He'd say, I'll get it to you tomorrow, and tomorrow never came for 2 years, and then they finally expelled him, or he dropped out. But I gather he wasn't the most fun classmate to have.
No, I don't think he was fun to anybody that he's with. Even growing up, I mean, I've known a lot about him. And then when he came to Vegas, it was almost impossible to avoid him because he was everywhere. And he has that same attitude. It's crazy. I felt bad for his brother Michael, though.
Yeah, I know that my dad said something very interesting. He said that a couple times some of Spilatro's older brothers would come to school and beat him up because they said he was disgracing the family with all of his antics. And,
I know.
He apparently caused kind of a I guess there was a lot of laughter among the Italian students one day because he got beaten up by one of his older brothers, and then he was in a rage because he couldn't beat him. He was down in the dust, beat down by his older brother, and he screamed, "You dirty Dago," at him. And for some reason, the Italians thought this was absurd, completely absurd, that he would call his own brother a dirty Dago. So in addition to getting his ass kicked in front of the whole school, now he had all the Italians in school laughing at him as he was lying there bleeding. So
and that's how he went out.
Yeah. Ironically, I guess that is,
Hello.
maybe not ironically.
He was really
Did your father
dirty
tell
that
you
day.
any stories about him?
In the cornfield, yeah.
No, did your father tell you any other stories about Spilatro?
Oh, just that aside from he said there was one thing about him that really stuck in his mind, was that one day Spilatro came into shop class and he was very morose, down. He wasn't being his normal self. And he finally somebody said to him, I don't know if it was my dad or somebody else, but he said, "What's the matter with you? You all right?" And he said, "I wish I was dead." And when they found him in the cornfield, obviously decades later, that came back to my dad's mind as being a very belated request.
They waited too long, though. That's the problem. They should have did it then.
Karma took maybe a few minutes too long in Tony's case. But that was kind of my introduction growing up, hearing these stories about these guys, seeing them in restaurants and stuff in Chicago. And then years later, what happened to me was my dad got transferred out to Washington, D.C. to cover the White House, actually, for his paper. And he ended up becoming the bureau chief for the Chicago Sun-Times out in Washington, D.C.
Oh, wow.
So I had kind of an unusual childhood, always meeting all these people that were in the business of
Under
government.
what president?
Well, we went out there I'm dating myself, but we went out there in 1977. I was 4 or 5. And so I guess we got there Carter.
Oh, sure.
And
My man, my good friend, Jimmy Carter.
yeah, we went out from there, and then my dad was doing that till he died. And but I, excuse me, I grew up there, and so a lot of the people that I met, were it was a completely different world. Not the Washington D.C. obviously not a mob.
Yeah, that's like black and white. Forget about it.
It's just not there. But In college, I met a lot of people from Jersey and New York, and I met people who, had people in various connections to various things at various levels, the low levels, of course. And I just learned some of the lingo and so forth. People would talk about their families. But then my own first experience was kind of funny because it had nothing to do with Italians. It was actually when I was living back in Maryland, this was around 2003, there was these Russians who had the most obvious front I think that I've ever seen in my life. They had basically a bodega. It was like a deli, but they had it in an alley with absolutely no foot traffic at all. There was no reason for there to be a deli in this alley.
The rent was cheap, that's why.
Now, on top of this, I picture me, it's in the alley behind my apartment building. So I used to go there sometimes to get a six-pack. But I was always very curious and suspicious because 2/3 to 3/4 of the shelves were always completely empty and there was no food in the deli ever. You couldn't order any food. So I'd always go in there and go, well, they just started, it's new. So maybe they don't have their supplies. So behind the counter, there's always 6 or 7 of these huge guys in tracksuits. They were giants.
They got it from John Gotti.
Yeah, they're in tracksuits. They're talking in Russian. Their boss has a scar across his face, exactly across his face, which when I talked to him, he told me was from a steering wheel. It was a very skinny steering wheel. It was about this thin, bright red, across his face. And they talk like this. They would say, what do you want? What do you want? What are you coming in here for? Well, I want to buy some beer. We'll buy some beer then. So I come into the place. They've got tattoos on their hands. Now, I had been to the academy by this point. I'd been to the State Correctional Academy at that time, actually. And they taught us how to read gang tattoos, Aryan Brotherhood, whatever, you know what I mean? Any type of gang tattoos. So I come in and one day the guy's making change for me and I see on his hands these particular patterns of dots. And in the old Soviet Union, they communicated to each other, the gangsters communicated to each other which prisons they'd been into by the patterns of dots on their hands. But that's the Soviet gulags. These aren't regular prisons. I mean, these are horrible,
Right.
They're basically concentration camps almost that these guys came out of. And they were very proud of it. Very, I did my time here, I did my time there. These guys, they're wearing chains. They got war movies in Russian in the corner. One day this woman blows in. She's wearing a floor-length leather jacket. She's got a huge fake boob job, nails out to here, screaming in the gangster's face, and he's taking it. So obviously there was a...
It was his mother.
He's going, ah! And he's got that look. What can you do kind of look. So one day there's a snowstorm, and I used to come in there sometimes, and they'd chit-chat with me, but in a very kind of Russian kind of way. Like one day the guy told me he was disappointed because he followed a police car 20 miles during a chase, and they didn't kill the guy that they were chasing. And he goes, I drove 60 miles out of my way, and they did not even shoot him. They did not even beat him. And I was like, well, you got out of the car and asked for a refund. So one day, this is in 2003 or so, there's a huge snowstorm, right? And I really needed a beer, but everything was closed. Because in Maryland, snow, they panic. I grew up in Maryland, and they act as if snow, they've never seen it. Every year it comes, and every year they act, they've never seen it. So I come home from work, I'm in a suit, I'm in a cashmere overcoat, I have a badge on my hip. I look pretty official. These guys don't respect me, but I'm thinking today, maybe I'll walk in my actual business clothes and they'll give me some respect. Snow's coming down. I walk in, the place is more picked over than usual. The shelves are completely barren. The boss guy is sitting behind the counter with his scar face. I see there's 1 6-pack left. Thank God I'm in business. I take it, I put it down on the counter. I give him a $20 bill. Now, this is in 2003, so $20 was worth more then than it is now. It's probably worth about $30 today, right? So he takes my money, he pushes the beer across, he goes into the cash register, and he gives me about $1 in change. I go, kind of look at it, and I don't want to say anything at first, and I just kind of giving him the look like, hey, you made a mistake. He doesn't say anything. He's just staring at me with a dead-eyed, completely expressionless face. So I go, hey, this is a 6-pack. I gave you 20 and you only gave me like $1. And he goes, yeah. And I said, it's a 6-pack. And he leans in He leans towards me till we're about 3 inches away on the nose. And I go, it was a 6-pack. And he leans in and he goes, yes, is last 6-pack.
So it's worth more money.
I'm thinking, you know what? I'm going to end up in the back of this place chopped up and never get my beer and lose my $20. So I take my beer and my badge on my hip, which is completely useless with these guys. My powers were useless against them. And I slink out into the snow. And I went back there sometime later and the place had shut down. It was the most obvious front. They weren't even trying. I mean, they were not even trying. They didn't care. They just didn't care. These guys had zero. Can I swear?
Sure. This is America.
The amount of fucks they gave was in the negative number. They just didn't give a shit. They might as well have had sandwich boards on them saying, you know, hi, my name is Sasha. I will be murdering you today. So,
do you write about this stuff? What do you write about?
You know, I do. I write about everything. I don't like writing in any one genre, but anytime I have an experience like this, it always works its way into my writing. As Pat will tell you, I try to always connect to the real things that I've encountered and just build on them or extrapolate from them.
Gianni, Miles has an ear. They say in this writing business, he can pick up any kind of an accent. If you say something to him in front of it, if you overhear something, 10 years later, it's going to wind up in a book. It's fascinating the way it works. The first book that I ever read that he wrote was a book about boxing and boxing and organized crime. That was Cage Life, right, Miles?
Yeah, Cage Life. And actually, I don't know if it's time to do my shameless self-promotion, but...
Go right ahead.
Please.
Okay. I just happen to have an old copy of it right here. But,
really?
Wow.
It was just sitting on the chair next to me.
That's
Would you
amazing.
look at
that? Yeah, I don't know. But this book and the sequel, I actually knuckled down.
Cage 2?
I actually put on sale on Kindle. I lowered the price to the maximum amount allowed to 99 cents for Kindle downloads in honor of being on this podcast. I can't go any lower than that or Amazon will have me shot.
Oh, wow.
So they're actually selling a book for 99 cents?
Well, you can control the price.
You control.
Obviously, I wouldn't sell it for that. Ordinarily, the paperback sells for 11, I think. But the electronic download, yeah, I pulled the electronic download as low as it would possibly go in honor of being here. So
you should have made it higher.
That's great.
Yeah. So if you want to pick up both books or anything else, that I pretty much lowered most everything to 99 cents in honor.
Well, I hate to tell you what you did. Told our audience if they run out of toilet paper, they're going to buy you a book. It's cheaper.
Well, but the laughing stock will be on them because these are electronic downloads.
The Kindle version.
They're gonna use their tablets.
I see.
Yeah, it's really going to hurt.
Yeah, hello. Now I know that. When I see a book, now I understand you're talking to a guy. I'll be 80 in December. So when I see a book, I see a book. I see pages. My grandmother would buy. My grandmother overheard that she'd buy 10 books right away.
Yeah,
just for the paper.
I'm a hard copy type of guy. I don't like electronic books that much myself, but that is the way the world is going. So it's available in all the formats, but you can't lower the prices on the paperback. They won't let you. They got to make a profit. So.
Oh, great.
So will you tell our audience a bit about these books, if you would?
Yeah, actually, and it's a little tied into an experience that I had. My mob education, if you want to call it that, in the Italian sphere of influence, came from meeting a guy when I was on the job. He was a low-level associate, but he was a
wait, ho. You just jumped from being a law-abiding citizen when you were in homicide. So talk about...
No, I wasn't in homicide. I was actually, it was a kind of a parole officer type of job. Okay. And so I met this guy. It had a fancy title. It wasn't a parole officer. I was a parole officer once, but this was called a correctional specialist, which is a fancy word for parole officer. And I met a guy, and he was an associate of it's the family out of Buffalo, Magadino, I think.
I know them well.
Okay, and they, as you know, they do a lot of business with the guys across the border in Canada.
That's where the grandfather started.
Yeah.
During Prohibition. Hello.
So that, and that's still there. That's still in place. And he was with both those guys. He was basically did the Canadian Buffalo run, and he sort of sounded me out. And the first time I met him, he came in a male attitude suit. So Johnny, I know you know what that is.
Yeah.
So if you're wearing that, it just says something about you. So I knew when coming in between his Roman coin that he had and a gold signet ring and the male attitude suit and the chunky gold Rolex watch, I knew what I was dealing with. But he ended up telling me a lot of things in a general way. He obviously wasn't stupid. He knew I wasn't going to be building a case against him or anything. So he didn't talk about criminal stuff. But he introduced me to a lot of things. And one of them was the story of Eddie Malo, which was a boxer very successful boxer in Canada who became an enforcer for the mob up there and ended up getting killed. And from that story, I got the idea for Cage Life, which I switched from boxing to mixed martial arts to make it a little more contemporary, also because I follow both sports. I'm very well versed in both sports. So I felt like I was on good ground there. But I decided, wouldn't it be interesting if we did a story about a mobster who doesn't want to be in the mob? He has to sort of pay off a debt, and they're using him basically as muscle. He has a debt, so he has to work it off because of his muscle, because he's very good with his fists. It's kind of a classic boxing story, but I changed it to mixed martial arts to contemporize it. And of course, it's the basic story of this guy, Mick, who is trying to get out of this situation where he owes a debt. But of course, because it's a book and you got to make it bad and then make it worse, the more he tries to get out, the more deeper he gets in. He starts enjoying himself, going down the wrong road. He buys into a piece of a gambling joint. His life gets more and more out of control. And that's what these books are about. They're about he's a low level guy. Is
he an Italian in the book?
Sorry?
Is he an Italian in the book?
He's half Italian, half Irish. I wanted to make sure he wasn't Italian on his father's side, because I didn't want him to ever be able to rise beyond a certain level. I thought that was very important for his character.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Kind of be trapped.
So, Miles, if I can cut in here, you don't have to be shy. This book won a lot of awards, if I'm not mistaken.
Actually, okay, I won't be shy. They both won a lot of awards.
And he has 10 of them right here. He has 10 awards right next to me in my trophy.
Actually, behind me is a trophy case that I specifically bought to show this off to the non-existent visitors that I have during COVID. It won Book of the Year in 2016. It also won the Best Indie Book Award in 2018. It was a Shelf Unbound runner-up as well. Knuckle Down won the Best Indie Book Award in 2018 and was also I want to say it was honorable mention in the Reader's Digest. Excuse me.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's a lot of accolades.
When I said he's a good writer, he's a damn good writer. I mean, he's the best. And
I'll have to read these.
I've had a lot of students. And this guy is head and shoulders. The only person I know, usually writers specialize in a genre. This guy does everything. He can write romance. He can write war books. He can write anything. Quite a talented guy, Miles. If you do say so yourself, right, Miles?
Yeah, look, I got Pat here to brag for me, and I can
Why not?
Back here looking humble.
Yeah.
Can be
No,
humble.
hey, listen. I've been Gianni's friend for about 5 years. I forgot what the word humble means. I'm going to have to look it up when the show ends.
Were you a writer before you met Pat?
I was, but I didn't have the discipline to finish things. What I learned in grad school from Pat, and I'll tell you my Pat story. When I first met Pat, okay, we're going to meet our mentors, right? Now, I've never met Pat. I don't know anything about it. I walk across the room, and there's this guy. He doesn't have his mustache anymore, but he used to have his powerful mustache. I sit down.
Like a Mussolini mustache, so I get the right thing, or a Hitler mustache. What kind of?
It was a savage mustache.
Yeah, I shaved it off. If I can interrupt you a second, I shaved it off because it was told I looked like a '70s porn star.
Oh,
You say that like it's a bad thing.
Yeah, I should have kept it on. Apparently. Anyway, go ahead, Miles. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So I come across the room and I sit down and I'm looking at Pat and I introduce myself and he goes, "So what do you want to write, kid?" And I said, "Well, my book is it's going to be about this guy who falls in with the mob and he's trying to get out, but he just keeps going back deeper in and he kind of starts to like it and everything, and he's a fighter and all this." And he goes, and he looks at me and he's got kind of this weary air, world weary, and he goes, do you know anything about this subject? And I say, well, I was a parole officer. I was an investigator for the district attorney. And, I did some competitive, not ever professional fighting, but did some, martial arts training and stuff. And he goes, oh, so you actually have some fucking life experience.
Yeah.
See, I gather that certain people who came to him that day were like, I want to write about, a New York City detective. And Pat was probably like vomiting in his mouth.
Yeah, I didn't fit the mold of a college professor. Perhaps that's why I'm not there anymore.
Yeah, the level of truth that was issued was probably more than some thin folk could take.
Hey, Miles, you had told me a story which I hadn't heard, and you're full of stories. You're a great storyteller about Felix Rodriguez, who I had heard of, and perhaps the audience hasn't. Tell our listeners about this.
I have not.
How you got involved?
Nor have I.
Yeah. So growing up where I did, my uncle, for example, was an FBI agent. He was actually way high up. I don't know the rank structure of the FBI, but I think he was like deputy assistant to the director of counterintelligence. There were a lot of people when I was in high school. I worked for a guy named Ford Meyer, who was one of the directors of the CIA during their wild period, 60s and 70s, when they were private armies, all the crazy shit the CIA was doing back then. The intelligence community is obviously, it's focused there. It's your neighbor, your friends, your dad. I had a soccer team where the coach of our team disappeared along with his son, and the whole family disappeared one day. My coach. You get there, there's no coach.
It's called Witness Protection Program.
Yeah. Yeah. God knows where they went or what they did, but my mom was laughing because she was like, "Oh yeah, they were in the State Department," because that's where everybody intelligence is in the State Department. But at any rate, we met, some unusual people. Other people would consider it unusual, but it's like in Hollywood, you meet actors and it's not that big of a deal. Well, where I grew up, it wasn't a big of a deal to meet people in military.
No, obviously.
Whatever.
Maryland, forget about it.
Yeah. So inside the Beltway, my dad was a White House correspondent. So one day, my dad would get me into things if he could, me and my older brother. And one day we got invited, and I want to say it was an embassy party, but this might be wrong. But at any rate, when George Bush the first was president, we went to some kind of function, and I was 16 or 17 years old, and it was my first time wearing a tux. I remember that very vividly. I was wearing a tux, so I was feeling really cool, like James Bond. And I don't think we were on American soil, so I was drinking. I felt really adult. And
where did you
George
go
Bush was
for
there.
this party? They airlifted you?
I want to say we were in an embassy. I want to say that.
Oh, okay.
I want to say we were not on American.
Yeah, so
soil.
they have no laws.
Not American laws anyway.
Right.
So we're there. The president is there. George Bush was there, and he gave a speech. I don't know if you guys remember Gary Shandling, but he was there. He did a big comedian. He did a big roast of the president, and then the president got up and talked, or maybe I have that backwards. But at any rate, I'm walking around with my beer, feeling very grown up. And around me are the reporters and the diplomats and all these people. And of course, they're in their dress, so the military guys are in their full dress uniforms, the tuxedo style dress uniforms. And I see a guy, and Latino guy, and he's got a tux, but he's got medals on it. And I thought, that's kind of odd. Like, he has those little medals that you wear on very dress uniforms, the small ones, about an inch and a half.
Right.
So I walk over to him, being a teenager, you don't have any social inhibitions, you just blurt stuff out. So I walked over to him and I said, "Hey, would you mind telling me what those are for?" So this guy goes, "Oh, no, not at all." And the first one, I don't remember any of what he said except the first one. He said, "This is the Intelligence Star. That's a medal you get in the CIA." So he says, "My name's Felix Rodriguez," and he goes into his whole life story about how he was in the Bay of Pigs, and he tried to kill Castro, and he was a mercenary for the CIA, paramilitary. He fights against the communists in Nicaragua. He was in Vietnam, and I'm thinking, this guy's full of it. Like, come on. At the time, I was like, nobody has this much of a life, And he's going on about it, and he said, "Actually, I was there when they killed Che Guevara." He said, "We caught him, and I was the last guy to pose with a picture of him." And he reaches in to his tuxedo, and he pulls out a really bad Xerox copy, I'm dating myself, photocopy of him in a like a military uniform with this guy who's all disheveled and looks like he's about to be shot, bearded, looking terrible, and it was Che Guevara. And he's telling me all these stories about he was being a mercenary and he's doing all this stuff. Mike Wallace from 60 Minutes walks over and rudely takes him away from me in the middle of these great stories. And I'm thinking, fuck you, Mike Wallace. And he takes Felix Rodriguez away from me. But before he left, he goes, kid, he goes, who's your dad here? And I said, my dad, Jerome Watson, he works for the Chicago Sun-Times. And he said, I'm going to get your dad a copy of my book. That's why he had the picture. He was coming from his publisher, and he had he had pages of the galley proof in his jacket. I actually think he probably carried them with him all the time.
Yeah, hello. His mother's carrying them now.
Like the next day, yeah, he's carrying them right now. The next day or very soon thereafter, my dad called me up from work and he said, hey, Felix Rodriguez just sent over a package to my office. My dad's office was downtown National Press Building. And he said, it's a galley proof, which for the audience, that's a book that has really had no editing. That's in its pre-stages. It's not for publication. It's basically for the editors to go over. It's not going to ever be sold, so it's full of mistakes. So these are like advanced copies. So he said, Felix Rodriguez shot over a book and says he wants you to have it. He said, what the hell are you talking to Felix Rodriguez for? I said, well, I want to read the book. So I read the book, and it turns out all this shit is true. He did all this stuff.
So why don't you write a book about him, I would think right away?
Well, because I'd probably disappear. Because I think he was ultimately exonerated of this, but he was part of that whole community of guys who walked the line between the government and then the paramilitary forces of the government, which, as you know, Iran-Contra, there's sometimes no distinction between them and organized crime at all.
No kidding.
Going back to Giancana.
Did you read our book?
I love it. Yeah. Guys you might have heard of, like Sam Giancana and those people back in the day, Johnny Roselli. But at any rate, I read his book, and he was on 60 Minutes. So anybody out there, you can probably YouTube that right now. Go on 60 Minutes and see, I think it was Mike Wallace's interview of him on 60 Minutes, which I watched.
Wow.
But later he was briefly linked. I don't think anything ever came from it, but 2 DEA agents made accusations against him that he was involved in the interrogation and torture of Kiki Camarena, who was a DEA agent working in Mexico, who was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered by the Guadalajara cartel because he was doing his job too well. And for them to hit a federal agent, as you all know, you don't take that step lightly.
Yeah, he was the only DEA agent that was ever killed, and the way he was killed, he was tortured over 3 weeks.
Yeah,
time,
and by professional interrogators, not just
they did everything to the poor guy.
Wow.
Yeah, and there was an accusation that Felix Rodriguez was there during some of the torture. I don't think that was ever. I know that was never proven, and it may be complete horseshit, but he has that kind of.
What did they want out of him that took that long?
He had all the cases that the DEA had on the cartels down there. He had a lot of information. He was a DEA agent. DEA was after the cartels, and they tortured him until they got every possible bit of information out of him, because you always give it up. You always give it up.
Yeah. And he was running, I imagine he was doing what you do. He was running informants. He probably had knowledge of ongoing investigations. He probably had names within the Mexican, the federal police department out there and everything. And unfortunately, it was a horrible story, but he was linked to that. And my mom was always like, don't talk to these people. She hated the CIA.
Oh, yeah, hello.
She
Mothers and their sons. Are you kidding?
Yeah. Don't talk to Cord Meyer. He's a war criminal.
That's wild.
So yeah, you met these people sometimes in Washington who were in this kind of shadowy, nebulous region of between doing government service and.
But primarily, you only write novels, fiction.
Yeah, for now. I love history, and I would love to write, history books if I had the time.
History?
Do all the research. Yeah, I would love to write on any subject. Actually, I like writing. Period.
Why, this new generation is changing all of that, so you better get the names right.
Yeah.
And the color of their skin.
Well, if the books get burned, it's hard to burn books in an electronic era. I don't know. Maybe so. You just destroy your own iPad.
Buy that easily.
Yeah, I've tried. I've tried. Doesn't work. Then
So
he
this guy
destroyed
Rodriguez
the-
is still around, by the way. You know that, right?
Who?
Felix Rodriguez is still around.
How old is he? 90? 100?
Miles, how old is he?
I mean, he was old enough to fight in the Bay of Pigs, so he's got to be,
I know. Hello.
yeah, probably close to 90.
I was 17, 18 during that time. So he's got to be up there.
Yeah, got to be.
But yeah, he's still around. I was
Says
kinda
he's
surprised
80.
when I looked it up. Really?
He's my age?
Yeah, Wikipedia says he's 80. Yeah.
Okay.
Wow. Where is
He
he?
must have been very young.
Where's he living? Does
I
it
don't
say
know
that?
where. I don't know where he is, but no,
I heard
it
a
doesn't say
rumor,
that.
Gianni, that he's your next door neighbor. Is that true?
Hey, I wish he was. That's our next book.
Hey, yeah. You guys would have a lot to talk about.
Yeah. Mark would like to have him right away, right? Get
I
Mark
would imagine.
Shaw.
Well, I mean, I guess he's already put out that one book about his life a long, long time ago. But yeah, it was an education onto that other side of things that because you've got your people that live within the law, you've got your outlaws, and then you've got your people in between.
Oh, yeah. And then you got the people who break all the laws that are in the law.
Yeah. And we call those people politicians.
Yeah.
And that's a nice segue into what are you doing now? You're in law enforcement now.
I am. I'm back. I was in Hollywood for 13 years in the entertainment industry.
What'd you do there? That's interesting.
I did a little writing, nowhere near as much as I wanted to. I'm actually getting more writing work since I left because that's the way life is. But I actually mainly worked in makeup effects when I was in, which I fell ass backwards into. I probably worked on about 200 episodes of television, 4 or 5 movies. I worked on True Blood, Fear the Walking Dead, The Orville.
Doing actual makeup for special effects?
No, doing the foam latex prosthetics for the most part, helping get those made, for like the dead people.
Yeah, I know.
and
Yeah,
stuff. Or I worked on CSI New York, where I was actually in the front office on that. Didn't do any makeup effects work there, but worked in the field. Basically, the shops, they make the bodies if there's a dead body, but it needs to look really realistic.
Oh, yeah.
They can go down to punching the individual hairs in a person. They can reproduce it so exactly. We've had actors asked to have the original because they don't want fake photos taken.
Right.
We'll do birthmarks. We'll do the makeup artists they'll match the eyeball, absolutely, like the iris, everything, broken capillaries under the skin, scars.
That's if you have a big budget show.
Oh yeah, $50,000 for one of those, $50,000, and you're probably only going to use it once. But
oh my gosh,
it's very expensive. But yeah, we did. I worked more actively on stuff like Walking Dead, and Fear the Walking Dead. And
that was a big show.
Umbrella Academy, yeah. Walking Dead.
Megan's breaking into that business right now.
Yeah.
I sure am.
Our little queen is on show.
Yeah,
a major show right now. She's breaking in.
Television's a fascinating industry. I'm having a lot of fun so far.
It is, and I
imagine a lot to learn.
I imagine I'm going to return to LA someday. It's just I needed a break, and I wanted to do something a little more.
Are you married?
Lasting. No.
Oh,
so
wow.
it's easy for me to trade coasts.
So you can run around.
Yeah. So I went back to I work for the district attorney out here as a advocate for victims of crime. So it's different from anything I've ever done because you're not locking people up. I'm not, threatening to lock people up. I'm dealing with people who've been victimized, in pretty terrible ways sometimes, trying to navigate them through the system. It's very different from anything I've ever done. It's never anything that I thought I was going to be doing. But after working in Hollywood for 13 years, it feels pretty good. But I'm still doing Hollywood projects. I got 2 projects I'm doing now, which I can't talk about because they're not out. But it's nice to have that income, and it's nice to be working.
Oh yeah, hello.
When I come home, from my job, it's nice to get back in harness and do the entertainment related things as well as my own writing.
So you with the Writers Guild, obviously?
No, I was never in the Guild. I worked with I asked for the Guild for help periodically. I'd call them up and say, what's going on? I have a question. I was never in the Writers Guild in LA because I didn't get enough work as a writer in LA.
That's wild.
All the years I was out there. There's this funny thing about LA. You can do anything you don't want, right? You have to prove to the universe that you don't want something, and then it will give you that thing. So I went out there. There were people who would kill your grandma to get a job on The Walking Dead. I didn't care. I'm not a makeup effects guy. I didn't know what I was doing.
Right.
So naturally, the universe puts me into this incredibly coveted position where I'm working in makeup effects with these real guys who really know what they're doing.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, I want to write.
That's funny.
Right. And I'm getting these little crumb assignments, these tiny little crumb assignments here and there over periods of years. But meanwhile, work is falling off the trees for everything that I never asked to do. Oh, you want to work in makeup effects in the front office? You want to work as a makeup effects artist? You want to go to set? And all these people who are coming out of makeup schools like the Savini School, which is near where
they would die to be there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they would die to be in it. But you have to prove to the universe you don't want it, and then you will have it. So I'm tricking. This is my wisdom. I'm tricking the universe.
Yeah, right.
I moved back out here, and I'm like, universe, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to write anymore. Immediately, hey, Miles, you want to do a couple of these projects? We're going to send you the money in advance.
It's reverse psychology with the universe.
Oh.
Yeah.
Right. It only took a few hundred years for me to figure it out, and bone-crushing, soul-shattering failures. But I'm over it now.
There you go. Yeah.
Well, it was a pleasure having you on the show. Very enlightening.
Oh, yeah. Always
Very
a fun.
fascinating.
Well, thank you for having me.
If you have another book that you want to talk about, please come on.
Yeah. What was the name of those two books? I forgot.
Well,
Miles?
I wrote the book, a World War II book.
No, the ones you were selling.
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry. This is my shameless pitch. I forgot.
Exactly.
Cage Life by Miles Watson. It's on Amazon and pretty much all the big booksellers online, but Amazon has the download special going right now. And also the sequel, Knuckle Down, a Cage Life novel. That's how you know it's the sequel.
All right.
And these covers are very old, and in case anyone is actually seeing this, but if you go on Amazon, I have an Amazon author page, and everything I've ever written is on there. I also have an IMDb. If you're curious about my Hollywood life, if you look me up by my full name, Miles Gerard Watson, I'm on IMDb.com. It doesn't have all my credits. It's got about 150.
Okay, that's a good name. Sound like a historian.
Thank you, Miles. You were very enlightening.
No, thank you. Very, very, very enlightening.
Yeah,
Thank you, guys.
Very entertaining too.
Well,
Yeah.
I've wanted to come on here for a long time, and I'm glad the bribes that I spread around finally those checks finally cashed instead of bouncing like my normal checks, like to my landlord, for example.
Yeah, I want to thank you for that. Thank you very much. Yeah.
The diamonds are real, Pat. They're 100% real. Don't
really?
check them out.
I threw them
Don't
out.
take them to a jeweler.
Okay.
They're not fake.
I didn't think so.
All right, well, please. Well,
Miles, thank you.
Thank you.
Megan and I knew nothing about the gifts under the table, but
You do now.
Well, look in your mailbox tomorrow. It won't be a horse's head, Gianni.
no. Thank God I have a very old building, very small mailbox. It's only this big.
Maybe
Well,
Thank you, Miles.
What a pleasure.
Have a good night,
Take
buddy.
care.
Thank
I'll
you.
be in touch. Okay,
We're going to go make some money, do a commercial, come right back with the mailbag.
Mailbag.
The mailbag.
Look
We'll
at
be
that
right
bag.
back. Today's show is being sponsored by Corleone Fine Italian Food Products. This sponsor really means a lot to me. Corleone Fine Italian has taken the heart and soul of the Godfather films and created a line of food products that include pasta sauce, balsamic vinegar from Modena, Italy, Genco extra virgin olive oil from Sicily. They created delicious pasta sauces, marinade, tomato basil, arrabbiato, and my favorite, Clemenza's meat sauce. You will be amazed. You will think your grandmother made the sauce herself. CorleoneFineItalian.com. That's CorleoneFineItalian.com. Okay, we're back. What do we got to? What mail do we have today?
All right, so we have a few minutes left, so I'll see what we can sneak in. First, I want to share a message from Susan. Susan says, the Hollywood Godfather Rapology is brilliant. It dropped this morning, and I was anxious to give it a listen. Once again, you broke ground and took your life an incredible memoir into unbroken territory. The collaboration, story, and music weaves a portrait of your life that represents the emotional highs and lows that you experienced, but more so, your iron will and ultimate desire to survive and win. Congratulations, Gianni, Pat, and Megan, Joel, and Arsonist. With best wishes and blessings for all of life's gifts. Warm regards, Susan.
Well,
Thank you,
that's great.
Susan.
Yeah.
Oh, very nice.
Wasn't that so sweet?
Yeah,
So well
I
thought
love
out.
And she didn't even have a question.
Yeah, it was
So
just
she just
to
wanted to thank
say
us.
congrats and
That's
express
great.
what she
That's
thought about
good.
it, which was amazing.
Yeah.
Very, very sweet, Susan. Thank you so much. Next one is from Nathan in Australia. Nathan says, Dear Gianni, Pat, and Megan, I have thoroughly enjoyed your and Pat's book, and I look forward to the new fictional series. As my partner and I approach 50 years old, me first, unfortunately, we got into a drunken discussion, argument, over MTV's Unplugged shows from 30 years ago. My love and dearest said it was Eric Clapton that did the first Unplugged on television. I said it wasn't, and that it was Elvis Presley's 1968 comeback special. Elvis singing That's All Right Mama is brilliant, showing a legend just enjoying singing and playing with his band, especially the great guitarist Scotty Moore. Gianni, when you knew Elvis, did you ever see the legend's pure enjoyment of plain singing and playing on an instrument without the hoopla?
No. He was too big at that time. There was no instruments that he was playing on stage. Everything else.
So whenever you guys spent time together, he didn't
Pick up
sing
an
or
instrument?
play anything?
No, he was doing too much drugs and too many other things.
Eating too many peanut butter and marshmallow
Hello.
sandwiches.
With bacon. You don't forget the bacon.
Bacon's
Yeah, the
important.
bacon.
That's where he got his protein. Very important.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there's that. Also from Nathan, he says, one more question for you and Pat, Gianni. Will Ray Yale fans be getting an appearance in your and Pat's new fiction series? Thanks to you, Pat, and Mr. Rand's weekly entertainment over the past 4 or so years. I will enjoy listening to your podcast over wine and pasta. Long may you reign.
Well, thank
Okay,
you.
I missed the first part of that.
So he asked if Ray Yale will be making an appearance in the fiction
Ah.
series you and Gianni are writing together.
You know, I think so now.
Ooh.
Ray Yale, for those of you who don't know who that is, that's my fictional private detective. I wrote 2 novels, and they're available also on Amazon now.
And
But
I
yeah,
love them.
Thank you. That's a great idea.
Good.
Really good.
I expect to read it over the weekend. The new character.
I'll have-
Ray Yale in there.
Yeah, I'll have the next chapter. Yeah, that's a great idea. I'm going to have the next chapter finished by the weekend, I hope.
There you go.
All right. Well, Nathan, you just made something happen.
Yep, you did.
All right. I think
mover
we
and
have
shaker.
time. Yeah. I think we have time for one more. This is from Lisa. Lisa says, this is a note for Gianni. Gianni, I went to see the 50-year screening of The Godfather in Dolby last night. It was fantastic on the big screen. I noticed your dance moves during the wedding scene. Looked like the jitterbug. Did they have to teach you the dancing? Love the podcast. Thanks, Lisa in Arizona.
No, when Costello used to go home for dinner on Fifth Avenue, there was a Fred Astaire dance studio, and they used to pay people like myself to go dance with all these old ladies. And I only went there. I didn't need the money. I was making more money than the studio was, but I learned how to dance there. So I go for an hour, 2 hours. You know, they hire you by the hour to dance with all these people on Fifth Avenue, and then I walk over to the Cobra again. But I learned how to
interesting.
dance there. I'm glad she noticed the dancing.
She was paying very close attention to you,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah, we never got a question like that before.
No.
Interesting.
I went to see it, I wanted to see it again. And I went over to AMC up in Lincoln Center this weekend.
Yeah.
And,
Why don't you?
well, I've seen it, 25 years ago maybe. But
Yeah.
on the big screen, it's so much better. If anybody has the opportunity, they should go see it.
It's going
Yeah,
to be
I
a
definitely
limited
plan
release. How
to
long's it
go.
going to be out?
I think it's only going up. It'll be up for about 2 more weeks, 3 more weeks. They
Oh, no, I
they
gotta
just
go
keep
see
it
it.
up so they get the screens to qualify again. I don't know what they're qualifying now.
For the awards.
Yeah, and then the new thing comes out. On
Oh, the offer?
we've got 3 things coming out. It's all good though.
Can The Godfather qualify again for awards?
I don't know. That's what I'm maybe best.
If the new cut counts
New
as
cut,
something?
not-
I'm not sure how
No,
that
I don't
works.
know. I mean, I think the revision of it, the music,
Well, there's an award for editing.
maybe that.
Maybe.
I don't know. I don't know what they're going for, but who knows?
Guess we'll see.
It was good to see, though.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah, I've never had the opportunity to see it on screen, so
Oh, you should see it if you have a minute.
yeah. No, I definitely plan on it for sure.
Good,
Soon.
good.
I'm excited.
All right.
All right. Well, that is all we have time for tonight, boys.
Well, I want to thank our audience again and again and again. We're going into our 4th year of thanking you. We really appreciate everything you do. Keep the cards and letters coming, emails, whatever means you communicate to. We listen to and answer. Pat, good night, my friend.
Hey.
Our Millennium Genius, who just keeps moving on. We'll be working for her next. Megan,
Yeah, we'll see.
love you.
Pretty
Good night,
cool.
guys.
Good
Good night.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
If you're feeling sad and lonely, there's a service I could render. I'm the one who loves you. So warm, so tender, call me. Don't be afraid, you can call me. Maybe it's late, but just
Thank you for tuning in to the Hollywood Godfather podcast. You can contact Gianni Russo, Patrick Picciarelli, or myself, Megan Horan, with your questions and comments through the contact section of our website, HollywoodGodfatherPodcast.com, which is where you can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter. You can also call and leave us a message at 646-776-3038. Remember to follow us on Instagram at Hollywood Godfather and on Facebook, as well as leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We'd like to know what you like about what we're doing, what you'd like to hear in the future, and anything else you might suggest to improve our podcast. Most importantly, hit the subscribe button. We'll be back next week with stories of the mob in Hollywood, as well as answers to your messages. Good night.
Call me. Don't be afraid, you can call me. Maybe it's late, but just call me. Tell me and I'll be around. I'll be around. Give me a call. When I was 17, it was a very good year. It was a very good year for small town girls and soft summer nights. We'd hide from the lights on the village green. When I was 17, I did it my